Just because the new Breath of the Wild sequel got its new title, Tears of the Kingdom, doesn't mean it's always been a Breath of the Wild 2. It's a sequel to Breath of the Wild. At its forefront, that's what we are going to expect. Which means a lot of the things that go on within this world are going to be familiar to us. Lots of the townsfolk, some of the people, characters, and probably even most of the combat is going to be very familiar to that of Breath of the Wild 1. At the same time, there's going to be so many unique and fun new changes. I mean, after all, we already see some popping up, including the fact that there's patterns showing Link fighting in mid-air with his bow. The point I'm trying to get at is that the Zelda team always listens to replies from the community, and they try their best to make their next installment everything that the community wants. The community wanted a bigger, more bombastic adventure where Link got to explore almost anywhere that he wanted to, and that's how we got Breath of the Wild. But this isn't even the first time we've seen something like this. When Wind Waker came out, the fans were divided. Lots of them loved the new art style and the new feel to The Legend of Zelda, but lots of them wanted the next game to be more grittier, more dirty, more adult-ish, you know, if you could actually put into words. They wanted it to be a lot different. And obviously Nintendo listened and gave us Twilight Princess, which is no doubt one of the darkest, creepiest Zelda games to date. Of course, people still complained and said it just didn't feel like Zelda and they wanted a Wind Waker 2 now. And of course, did Nintendo give us that? Yes, actually, they kind of gave us a direct sequel to Wind Waker, but it was on the DS in the form of Phantom Hourglass, which was not the greatest Zelda experience, but it definitely was to kind of feed those players that wanted to see Wind Waker style of gameplay and that Toon Link all over again. And then you can also include Spirit Tracks because it was in the same vibe as well. And then eventually, to please kind of both fans of the Wind Waker art style and the Twilight Princess art style, we got Skyward Sword on the Wii, which was, like I said, a little bit of a blend of both of those games and had its own unique art style, which personally I think is one of the best. Not to mention, they clearly have heard the cries of people wanting this game to come back to the Switch, so Nintendo listens. Believe it or not, the Zelda team listens to the fans, and they try their best with each new installment to make the game a little bit even more perfect than they already are. But what now? The Zelda team has done the impossible and made one of the best Zelda experiences to date. What else could they possibly add to make Tears of the Kingdom the perfect title ever? Well, there's still some little things that Breath of the Wild had problems with, but today I'm focusing on the main thing that people are asking for and people have been asking for since the game launched originally, and that is dungeons. But yes, we had divine beasts and we also had shrines to visit and do little tasks in order to complete them, but at the end of the day, it still wasn't the same as dungeons. They had great mechanics and layouts for lots of these shrines, but they were in bite-sized pieces, which wasn't a terrible thing. It was fun to actually complete these little mini dungeons, but lots of people wanted all these things put together in themed dungeons, and lots of the time, these themes, or really every single shrine, had the same theme. There were all these little rooms with skylight and Sheikah technology lights all in them, and they all kind of looked identical from one another, and they didn't have those fun themes that we've seen in past Zelda games. Before Breath of the Wild, dungeons were the Zelda game staples. I mean, it's the only thing that we've come to expect from Zelda games at that point. If there was ever a new game announced, we didn't know what the characters were going to be, where the story was going to go, but there's one thing that we could always count on. Whether it was a 2D or a 3D Zelda experience, we knew it was going to have dungeons. Dungeons gave the world around it life, and not just because of what was on the inside, but also the outside and everything surrounding that dungeon. I mean, lots of the time you had to do special side quests and instructions to get into the dungeon in the first place, and it wasn't necessarily the case for Breath of the Wild. Yes, there were some shrines that require you to do something in order to reveal them, but lots of them were also just sticking above the land and you just jumped in. And yes, I know the divine beasts require you to fight each of them before eventually getting into the interior, but there was just something about the classic Zelda dungeons that require you to go around the world, find secrets, and talk to people in order to find a way inside these things. But like I said, I feel like this is one of the very few things that's missing with Breath of the Wild's formula right now, and I think Tears of the Kingdom could really pick this up. I think the Zelda team has been listening to us, and they know what we want to see from Zelda and Link this time around. Personally, I really do think The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is going to have dungeons this time around. Here's why. A couple months ago, Nintendo claimed that they couldn't reveal the title for Breath of the Wild 2 yet because it was going to spoil the game and give away too much information too soon, which a lot of people started speculating what in the world was the name going to be. Was it going to spoil the main villains, something to do with Ganon or Ganondorf or something? Who knows? Was it going to give away like a playable Zelda or some type of new exploration thing that would change Zelda as we know it? Well, Currently, it doesn't look like this title is doing any of those, because we know the title now as The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Well, what does that have to do with any of the gameplay? Well, probably not a lot. Maybe it's just a story tie-in. There's an awesome video right now that you can watch by Awesome Face Prod where they went into full detail about what this title could mean in a story perspective. They talk about how Tears of the Kingdom could reference an emotional story that we're getting, and not necessarily a sad one, but tears of joy and sighs of relief from the kingdom. They also go on to talk about many different tears that we've collected in Zelda games prior. We've collected tears from the moon in Majora's Mask in order to progress the story in the very beginning. Collected tears for the Vessel of Light in Twilight Princess. Could even collect Great Fairy tears from that game. Even collected tears from each of the 3 goddesses within the 3 different providences in Skyward Sword. These helped our spirit to grow in order to collect special items to progress through the story and enter specific dungeons. We've even seen tears drop from Sheikah pillars in Breath of the Wild in order to update our Sheikah slate. And also mentioned by Awesome Face Prod, we can even include the not so canon Breath of the Wild Age of Calamity, where Zelda's tears help to awaken Terrako. So I think you get the point that I'm trying to make here. This isn't the first time we've seen tears in Zelda games, and I'm not necessarily talking about a story aspect here, but I think there could be a big gameplay motive, especially considering the fact that tears is actually in the title now, and not just something that we collect in the game as a side quest. If I told you these tears were the main part of the game, and not just the main part of the game, but actually tied to dungeons themselves. At the very beginning of the brand new trailer, we see a slate of this mysterious figure holding 7 tears. Personally, I think we are going to have to collect each of these tiers, which means we have to go throughout this land and collect 7 tiers. And I think they're not just going to be laying about anywhere, they're going to be only obtainable after completing dungeons. And I think at the end of each dungeon, Link will be rewarded a tier. This would give us 7 dungeons, which is a pretty good amount. In fact, we've had 7 dungeons in Wind Waker and Skyward Sword, and maybe even more that I'm not even thinking about at the moment, but we've always had 7 or more dungeons for the most part, excluding games like Breath of the Wild with only 4 Divine Beasts, and obviously Majora's Mask with only 4 dungeons in that game as well. But why are we collecting these tiers in the first place? What are they doing for Link? Well, I think it has to do with his Master Sword. We did get a snippet of Link about to do something with his Master Sword with this glowing light in front of him, and it looks like the Master Sword has been through a lot. Maybe the whole point of this game is Link repairing his sword in order to fight Ganondorf. He needs 7 tiers in order to bring it to its full capacity again, and each of these tiers can be collected after completing 7 dungeons. That would explain the glowing ball of light in front of him, and maybe it's a tier, we just can't see it yet because they decided not to show us because it would spoil the game obviously at that time. This isn't the first time we've seen Link have to repair his sword. In fact, most of the games is about him repairing his sword, and one of the ones that I can think of that kind of resembles this the most is Skyward Sword, where he's turning his goddess blade into the blade of the hero, the Master Sword. She was only able to do after completing 3 dungeons that were kind of tests given to him by the 3 different goddesses. Remember, he was only able to enter these dungeons and imbue his sword with these flames because of the tears that he collected from each goddess, which once again might have a tie-in to this game's Tears of the Kingdom. Maybe Link's on a similar journey of repairing his sword by obviously completing these dungeons and collecting these tiers. But is there any more evidence of dungeons being present in any of these trailers? Well, not really, but we can kind of speculate again. We do know that there's going to be giant structures up in the sky. In fact, we see Link actually swing open 2 giant doors of some structure. At the very end of the platform, we see some type of sanctuary area. I don't know about you, but to me, it looks like the very end of a shrine where the monk would sit, where you would finish the shrine by obviously talking to the monk and gaining an orb. Which makes me think that this scene could very well be the end of a dungeon. You just defeated the dungeon boss, and now you're making your way back outside in order to get to that tier and embed it into your sword. It also looks like Link is standing on some type of pillar in the middle, and also there's weird carvings all around him, which means it's a very important, significant spot, which looks like it could definitely take place at the end of this walkway we see. There's really only one other part of the trailer that makes me question, and it's this giant building that we see in the sky. And it's not the first time we see it, and I'll show you the second picture in a second, but we get a new angle at it, and it is huge, like massive, and it could be some just main point of interest in this area, or maybe it's a little bit deeper than that. Maybe it's an important sacred ground that you have to keep returning to, or maybe it's some type of central building that you have to keep returning to after collecting each tier, just like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Please don't be that. In the second trailer that we've gotten for this game, you can see that building again. You can tell it's even bigger than we've seen it before, because before, we were viewing it from the side. Now we're viewing it from either in front or behind. Now, there is a chance there could be multiple versions of this same looking building. I mean, after all, we've seen multiple versions of the same looking shrine on the ground, so maybe this same looking building is the same shrine-like structure all over the sky. What if these are dungeons and all dungeons look like this from the outside, but maybe the insides are a lot different? But either way, personally, I think these giant buildings in the sky could be dungeons, which would be really cool. And in order to get the tiers at the end, we have to complete them and of course their corresponding boss, just like we would in the past. There's so much more to talk about with just this little bit of gameplay that we've gotten, and if I would keep going, it would go on to about a 20 to 30 minute video. But I even have theories as to what these dungeons could be like on the inside, and the fact that the game's called Tears of the Kingdom, maybe it's kind of a reference to a throwback of the tears of the past civilizations of this kingdom, meaning yes, maybe even throwing in elements of past games. What if these dungeons were themed around different themes that we've already visited, like a dungeon themed after the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time, or even Arbiter's Grounds from Twilight Princess, or even the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. That way these dungeons would almost feel like remnants of forgotten past. But there's so much to talk about, of course. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Nintendo in general, and I'll be sure to talk about even more theories in the future. Let me know in the comments down below if you found anything yourself or have any theories that you want to share, and thank you so much for tuning in, and like always, I'll see you all on the next one. See ya, guys.